Well, Omega just dropped a mass of new watches. I don't know if I can be a watch YouTuber and not have an opinion on this day. So here it goes. First thing, I'm not going to really dive in and deep dive into each of the watches. I'll touch on it quickly. But I really want to talk about three issues. One, do I think that Omega has copied Rolex, which seems to be something of a thing on the internet at the moment? Two, very quickly, I will talk about whether I like the watches or not. And in three, what I want to talk about is kind of the collection, the mass, the drop as a whole. What do I think of Omega's release here? Anyway, let's get into it. Okay, so let's get into the first and probably the most controversial question. Do I think that Omega has copied Rolex? In a word, no. In two words, that's ridiculous. It's kind of like saying that in releasing the most recent Alpine Eagle, Chopard copied the Belarus BR05. To say that, you kind of have to ignore a huge amount of history beforehand. The truth is that watch companies have been incorporating more and more color into their watches over the last 5 to 10 years. Rolex caught up with that like last year, years after a whole bunch of other brands had really laid the groundwork and made the trend. And so it makes no sense to say that a new brand that's introducing color is somehow copying Rolex. As I said, that requires a certain level of myopia, certain level of anyway, a kind of blindness to anything that someone else is doing other than Rolex. Last year, I did a video predicting exactly this. I said that the days of having a black and a white watch are over. That big brands, all future releases, are going to have as a minimum 4 colors, probably 5 or more. What I was saying is black, white, certainly blue, almost certainly green, probably red, and then supplemented by things like orange and salmon and that sort of thing. Given that that was not a particularly controversial statement a year ago, it shouldn't have caught anyone by surprise that in their model refresh of the Constellations and Aqua Terras, that's exactly what Omega gave us. And so I think that you can criticize Omega for being late to the color game. You can criticize them for not really bringing this on quickly enough, but to criticize them as copying one brand that has also jumped on the train of bringing more color to watches, as I said, it's just nonsensical. Okay, what about the second point? What do I think of the watches? Well, two big groups of watches, 2 and a bit big groups of watches. Really, all they got was a color update. So there was some Constellations, particularly the smaller ones. There was the Seamaster Diver, got the green, and then there was the Aqua Terras in 36 and 39, I believe, that got a whole raft of color updates. And I think that's pretty much all they got. And they're great. All of those watches are fundamentally good watches. They were all handsome before the color updates. And the color updates are really cool. They've been really nicely done. They're not just simple painted dials. There's some really interesting metallic treatments being done here. The colors aren't simple primaries. They're nice plays and shades that work well with the sort of watch styles and shapes. So all in all, I think those basic Constellation, the Seamaster, the green Seamaster, and the multicolored Aqua Terras are brilliant. I think moving from there, we move into the Speedmaster line. There was some mixing and matching of greens and golds with the gold stuff. Again, green and gold, well-known color combination, particularly as an Australian. Yeah, it's a color combination we see a lot. Everyone from Rolex, Tudor, and a whole bunch of other people have used that color scheme before. It's reasonably good looking and it worked okay. Yes, Omega also picked up on the trend that Hublot started by starting to mix and match rubber straps with precious metals, and that looks okay. So all in all, that's fine. I think the biggest change that happened in the Speedmaster line is certainly the update to the 2 register 57 line. First off, got a new movement, got a bit thinner. I think it went manual wind. All of that is great. And again, unsurprisingly, it got the color updates that everyone else got. And again, absolutely gorgeous colors, really nice selections. Interesting with that kind of retro look to put in very modern colors. Some of the, I think, a little bit like, I'm reminded a little bit of what Breitling just did with a very modern ice blue on that retro-inspired the retro-inspired top time they just did. The very modern purples, for example, that we saw on the new 2-dial Speedmaster is really kind of era and time period blurring. And I think I really enjoy that. I probably need to see it in the metal, probably need to spend some time with it. But right now, I'm loving what they just did with the 2 register 57s. Of course, the big news was I won't say a whole new watch line, it does fit under the Planet Ocean, but the new Ultra Deep 6,000 meters depth capacity, depth rating, is incredible. And I love that these watches exist. I think that they're actually wearable. They're not super huge at, I think it's 45 millimeters and 17 and a bit, 18 millimeters thick. That is big. Look, you're going to have to be a bigger person to pull that off, but it's not insane. There are chronographs around that are that size already. This is not an unwearable watch. It's just a really big one. I think they've integrated that into a particularly good looking case and watch dial. I think that it would be really easy for something like that to become super boring and slabby. And I quite like the way that Omega have handled making that into something with a 6,000 meter water resistance into something that's wearable and good looking. Now, I think there's an easy criticism of this watch. Who the hell needs 6,000 meters? And that is absolutely true. But if we were to make a list of all the watch features that we don't need, it would be extraordinarily long. We don't need chronometer grade mechanical movements. For God's sake, we don't need second hands. We don't need equations of time. We don't need moon phases. We don't need chronographs. There's all sorts of things we don't need. Every one of those things, and water resistance, particularly the more extreme stuff, they're all vanities. They're all pretenses, little artificial and totally arbitrary rules, effectively, that the watchmaker has imposed on themselves to play the game of making an interesting watch. That's all they're there for. And there's nothing more valid, there's nothing more worthy in making a more accurate watch than a watch with a higher water resistance. Which one you personally prefer is just that, is just preference. Neither actually gives you anything particularly more useful. As a Breitling fan, I've always kind of liked how they play with that notion and produce some watches with really significant depth ratings that are quite thin. So it's a game I like to see played. How big a water resistance can I get? And I think Omega have just rolled out the top trump here in producing steel and titanium versions of plain old everyday watches you can walk into an AD and buy that can go 6 kilometers underwater. So like I say, I accept that you don't need it. I accept it's ridiculous. All I ask is that you accept that every other complication and weird thing we do to a watch, like demand amazing accuracy, is just as silly, and take it for what it is. The opportunity for the watchmaker to have a bit of a flex and have a play. So I think in doing that, it's a great watch, and I'm super stoked to see Omega bring it out. Okay, so let's wrap this up. What did I think of the release? I think the release was a total hot mess, a complete disaster, and sums up everything that is wrong with modern Omega. Even though I like the watches, even though I don't think that they're copies, even though I think that the Ultra Deep makes a lot of sense and it's a watch I love, I think the release itself was a complete shit fight. So where did it go wrong? Okay, number one, what the hell is Omega doing releasing a whole new bunch of watches like the Ultra Deep and then obscuring the message, minimizing the impact, confusing us all, but at the same time releasing like dial variations to the Aqua Terra? It's just stupid. People have only got so much bandwidth, and to collapse everything into one release after everything we have learnt about the value of dribbling things out over a year, over the last couple of years, is just mind-boggling. I do not understand how Omega made a mistake of such magnitude after we've seen the importance of pacing yourself in these releases. 2, you cannot be in a major brand manager in the watch space now and not know that you are going to be compared to Rolex. That is, particularly at Omega. You must know that, and you must see that, and you must be prepared for it, and you've got to defuse that bomb before it's thrown at you. I cannot understand why Omega let this happen, why they structured their release with all of these watches coming out at the same time in a way that encouraged all of the memes and all of the jokes and all of the comments that we're seeing. I already said that they really needed to bleed this out, but what they should have really done was, for example, give us the Ultra Deep, but not release the Degradé blue dial at this stage. It's a great looking watch and it should come out. Do it later. Give us all the other colors and then roll the blue out like in a couple of months from now. Don't even tell us you're doing it. Just stick it up on the website and let people start buying it. Don't even issue a press release. You could do the same thing with all of those, with the Aqua Terras. You could give us some of the colors and dribble some of them out later. You could have avoided some of the colors that you would have known are going to draw crabs. And again, dribble them out later. Don't even give us a press release. Just let them slowly appear and then we know that they're there. So like I said, they're just 2 problems. I think I haven't even mentioned the Speedmasters, which I think are fantastic watches. And again, which got buried in this morass of Ultra Deeps at one end and Aqua Terras and Constellations at the other. There was, again, another whole section of watches that just got lost in this huge amount of discussion, a huge amount of release. And the third problem is, I look at this release and I look at all of the watches that come out of Omega at all, and I can't, even if you are going to release them all at once, I couldn't find any thread that joins them together. A year or so ago, I did a series on what I think Omega needs to do if it wants to grow, if it, God forbid, wanted to challenge Rolex. And one of the things I really stressed was Omega had to give us their why. Why do they exist? Why would I buy an Omega? If you look at the brands that are killing it at the moment, Rolex, Cartier, Breitling, Seiko, Tudor, they all have a really strong why. You know why that brand exists. You know what they're trying to achieve. You know what their identity is. And it's reflected in everything they do. Omega, on the other hand, just seems to be this scattergun of very good watches that aren't brought together by any theme, aren't brought together under any single roof. I understand why you would buy a Speedmaster, and I understand why you would buy a Seamaster, and I understand why you would buy the Aqua Terra. But what I don't understand, looking at this collection, is why would I buy an Omega? And again, I think this release, this big release, for all of its problems, and I don't think they should have done this big release, it would have given you at least the opportunity to say, this is why you buy an Omega watch. And they screwed it. There's nothing there that says this is why you should buy an Omega. And that is the reason why I say this release sums up everything that is wrong with that brand right now. It makes great watches. Its technology is amazing. Its value for money quotient, if that's important to you, is off the charts. It should be killing it. It's not. And the reason is the watches are great. They look fantastic. It's fantastic tech, but the brand is anonymous. I don't know what Omega stands for. I don't know why I want to buy an Omega watch. And until they fix that, they will continue to just drift.